The most disturbing things to see rolling in are storm clouds. Halfway across an enormous expanse of water in a small canoe laden with all your gear and supplies is no place to be caught when the heavens open up. Strong winds can whip up some massive waves, even on relatively small lakes, and the threat of lightning strikes is always intense. A large amount of hikers and campers are struck by lightning every year, with dozens being unlucky enough to be a target each year. Even when you're not out in the open or stuck out on the water, storms can create a myriad of problems and obstacles. Falling trees and branches are a serious risk, with even the most protected campsites being left fairly exposed. High winds are another important issue to consider, and if they start to kick into high gear, even the most experienced campers will be on their toes. The tension during storms while camping with no emergency services on deck is enough to break anyone. Fortunately, planning a trip ahead of time can help you avoid these deadly storms, as can keeping track of weather forecasts leading up to your trip. Having a hand crank radio can be a lifesaver at times like these, allowing you to keep up to date no matter where you happen to be. A little foresight goes a long way. Making sure you're prepared for any eventuality will ensure that you don't have to worry about being scared to death or worse by a bolt of lightning touching down right in front of you, or having a tree collapse on top of your tent. The danger isn't even clear after the storm passes, with half-felled trees to consider, debris blocking portages, and many previously useful campsites being decimated. If you do happen to find yourself on the water when a storm hits, immediately head to the closest campsite or shelter and try your best to get protected as soon as possible. At terrifying times like these, reacting quickly can be the difference between life and death. Number 4. Beaver Fever. With less widespread destruction and devastation than a storm would cause while passing over your campsite, another serious issue that every camper worries about is giardiasis. This disease is caused by drinking tainted water. Usually, this water becomes tainted with animals' fecal matter, specifically with the ingestion of cysts. These pollutants aren't all that appetizing to think about to begin with, and aren't worth thinking about right after a meal. What makes beaver fever so scary is the side effects and after effects. Much like during a storm, if giardiasis hits, it's all hands on deck, or it could very quickly turn fatal. Making things even worse is the fact that nobody else can be sure if they're next in line for their body to begin vacating itself in the most unpleasant of ways. Watching a fellow camper succumb to this is uniquely terrifying and will scare even the most seasoned outdoorsman. This disease can leave its victim emaciated and looking like a shell of their former selves. Extreme cases require intensive rehabilitation, with a number of campers dying each year without getting treatment in time. Many veteran campers believe that no purification tabs or techniques are necessary as long as water isn't collected along the shoreline in the middle of large lakes. This certainly helps lower the chances of your water being contaminated, but by no means does it prevent that possibility altogether. Carrying purification tabs is an important consideration to keep in mind when planning to go camping, even if they leave your water tasting a little off. If you run out of tabs or forget to bring them, ensuring all water is thoroughly boiled before consumption is your next best bet. There are portable purification stations designed specifically for camping that are on the market if you want to ensure that you'll have absolutely no worries. If, on the other hand, you want to save a little extra money, you can always use a number of home-brewed methods that'll do the trick in a pinch. Number 3. Bear attacks. Another danger to keep in mind when camping is that you're basically out in the middle of nowhere, about as close to being in the wilderness as you can get these days. Help, as previously mentioned, is gonna be far away and it'll take a long time to find you before actually reaching you. When you're in these spots, you'll invariably find yourself in bear territory. Known for being curious as well as fearless, these creatures are much less cuddly up close and in person than Paddington or Winnie the Pooh have led you to believe. Bears are, to put it bluntly, massive killing machines, loaded with muscle and packing enough bite strength to snap you in two. Add those massive paws topped with their flesh-ripping claws, and you've got one hell of an opponent if a bear happens upon your campsite. The basic rule of thumb is puff yourself up as large as you can and make as much noise as you can. This, in theory, will intimidate a bear and scare it into scampering off, completely convinced it was outmatched. Now, correct us if we're wrong, but we believe that making a lot of noise is the equivalent of a chihuahua trying to nip at our ankles. It's cute for a bit, but wears thin pretty quickly. Our recommendation is to be prepared at all times. When you set up your campsite, take a look at the surrounding area and make sure you don't find any tracks. If you do, it's probably time to move. Furthermore, bears will always be attracted to food. Try to avoid any food or drink that has a strong odor to it, and always hang your kit in a tree with a rope at least 100 meters from where you plan on sleeping. This way, if a bear does come poking around looking for a quick meal, you won't end up being dinner. While on a portage, try to make loud noises relatively often and speak loudly. While probably not all that intimidated by us up close, bears are naturally wary of humans and will generally avoid you if they know you're around and making a racket. If you surprise them, which usually involves both parties having a bit of a shock, then things can become incredibly scary far too fast. Whatever you do, don't run. Bears love to play tag, and most of them don't know their own strength. Play dead all you want, but after a run-in with these lumbering beasts, you probably won't need to embellish your role, and playing will be the last thing on your mind. Number 2. Abandoned cabins. If you know an experienced camper, then you can probably get a story about a scary run-in with some lunatic out in the middle of nowhere. Given enough time, you'll probably run into a hunter exhibiting symptoms of cabin fever, or maybe even a hermit who just wants to be left alone. This also goes for anyone who's come across a cabin out in the middle of the woods, whether camping or not. They can attest to the fact that the situation is intensely creepy. Images of Deliverance spring to mind, and you can almost hear that banjo twang echoing off the trees. While hunting cabins are rare in many camping spots, you'll come across them every now and then. Even more terrifying are those belonging to poachers. Shells and cartridges, both spent and live, scattering the dust-heavy shelves and beds, making the scene feel even more grim. Wise campers will always steer clear of these spots, as nothing good will ever come of them. Honestly, a tarp and a branch are better choices when it comes to laying down for the night. Even with nothing to worry about, trying to sleep somewhere when you're miles away from the nearest cell signal and not 100% sure if the inhabitant will show up at some point doesn't make for the best night's sleep. Worst case scenario, if someone does come knocking, involves running for your life, while best case still means getting the door kicked in and being greeted with a lot of scrutiny. That doesn't sound like a pleasant walk in the park either way, and is probably best avoided. Number 1. Unexplainable sounds. Nature is pretty freaky to begin with. Drop someone in a forest and wait until nighttime to watch the real hysteria kick in. The woods can be terrifying places to be at night, with plenty of unknown animals and sounds to scare the daylights out of us. One account comes out of Bristol, where 2 girls snapped a picture that seems to show a girl wearing a white shroud. The girl claims that the figure was a little girl singing at 1 a.m. Creepy, right? We're sure that these girls' minds were just playing tricks on them, but you never know. These stories are all a case of you had to be there. Imagine knowing that you're far from help, and that if you did in fact run into a creepy little girl intent on stealing your souls, there's probably nothing you could do. This is why camping isn't for those prone to stress or anyone wound up too tight. All the added elements that go into camping can send us off the deep end pretty quickly. Dark descending on the woods also brings out all sorts of predators. Listening to what's going on outside while you're trying to get a little shut-eye in your exposed tent just makes it seem even more intense. Half of what makes us scared about everything that gives us the heebie-jeebies is fear of the unknown. When it comes to camping, there are a lot of unknowns every step you take. Every tiny sound could be a Wendigo coming to get you, or a wild animal checking in on the latest dinner offerings. When we've only got one life to live, these unexplainable sights and sounds can trigger our fight or flight reflex and get astonishingly scary relatively quickly. And there, you have the 5 scariest things seen by campers. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like and share it, and if you haven't already, subscribe down below to get notified almost every single day with new videos from Top 5's finest. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, we are out. The world has been inhabited by some strange creatures, with more being discovered with each passing day. So much remains to be discovered here on Earth, with so many odd species still living and even more bizarre fossils buried beneath the surface. Today, we're bridging the gap between legend and reality, with 5 cryptids that might actually exist in real life. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notified every day for more amazing content. With that being said, let's begin. Number 5. Nymphs and Dryads. Nymphs and Dryads are basically one and the same. They also have many of the same characteristics and are said to inhabit the same environments, but do have some slight differences in folklore. Forests, streams, and anywhere with trees in abundance are longtime favorites, with dryads supposedly being fond of oak trees. It goes without saying that dryads would probably be found in forests, as they're said to actually gravitate to one special tree in particular and are not found further than a few dozen meters away from it. Nymphs are traditionally more mobile and not confined to any particular space. They've been said to inhabit caves in some circumstances as well. While no studies have been done that have proven either species could possibly exist in real life, we think that there are enough sightings to suggest that it's at least worth considering. Nymphs, as we mentioned earlier, aren't forced to stay in one spot, but all the lore available does suggest that they don't stray too far from home no matter what. Being traditionally incredibly shy and wary of humans, if these creatures were around, you can be sure that they wouldn't want to be found. Humans aren't the most historically accepting group, and we do have a long tradition of attempting to wipe out all other life. It goes without saying that if these mythical creatures have been around as long as people say, they should know full well that it's in their best interest to stay out of sight. It's also said that dryads can literally step into their own tree if cornered to effectively disappear from prying eyes. Many people have claimed to surprise them, with the wood sprites then promptly taking off before a proper shot can be captured. This being the case, getting good footage can be a struggle, but isn't unheard of. Lots of possible footage has been taken, but so far not much has actually been substantiated. Most of it is grainy or blurry, although you can't really expect these spry and nimble entities would give up their likeness without putting up a fight. We're keeping our fingers crossed that they might actually exist in one way, shape, or form, but the jury's still out on this one. Number 4. Unicorns. And so we come to unicorns. The actual mythical creatures are said to have a wide variety of abilities depending on what group you talk to. Healing powers and the ability to fly feature most, but one thing that all unicorns have in common are their unique horns that are perched, much like a narwhal, right in the middle of their forehead. Unlike the narwhal, however, we all know that unicorns don't exist. Furthermore, we've been pretty sure that nothing like a unicorn actually roamed the Earth, until recently. A new discovery has provided a lot of evidence to suggest that our ancestors may have lived alongside animals that are eerily similar to the unicorns of legend. The Siberian unicorn was thought to have lived anywhere between 29,000 and 360,000 years ago. The original number was way up at 360,000 years ago, but a new discovery has suggested that they were actually around much more recently. A preserved skull located in Kazakhstan was dated and found to be only 29,000 years old. Elasmotherium sibiricu, the scientific name for the Siberian unicorn, does have a certain magical ring to it as well. It is thought that these beasts inhabited Eastern Europe and Asia, although it is distinctly possible that they covered much larger expanses. The fact that they undoubtedly lived around the same time as early humans means that it is also absolutely possible that stories of these creatures have been passed down in a game of telephone dating back thousands of years. Spoken stories could easily have morphed the physiologies of these admittedly rhinoceros-looking beasts into the sleek, beautiful creatures that we have come to know as unicorns. Number 3. Sea serpents. These creatures have captured the imaginations of sailors and landlubbers alike since people first started exploring the open seas. These fearsome environments are not for the faint of heart, with plenty of superstitions passed down along the ages. Sea serpents have always been one of these and have been the topic of many stories. These days, many people also claim to have seen lake monsters that rival some of the largest that supposedly dwell in our oceans. This enormous beast was spotted in the waters off Catalina Island in California and seems to be enormous. A lot of people have pointed out that it's probably a massive oarfish that is expected to measure over 30 feet long. While not technically a serpent, oarfish do have many of the same characteristics and also have a narrow, elongated body, hence their name. They do not feed on the sea floor and are usually found looking for a snack closer to the surface. Oarfish inhabit temperate oceans all over the world and can be found in a wide variety of habitats. Furthermore, the giant oarfish is the longest bony fish alive. Could be that all those sailors who initially started the sea serpent rumors had actually just run into a massive giant oarfish or something else equally as large and impressive. These relatively mysterious creatures also usually have extremely large eyes, which would certainly be incredibly unsettling for anyone who happened upon one without any prior warning. It goes without saying that people back in the day weren't quite as hip to these type of creatures when we first started navigating around the world, and as we mentioned earlier, sailors aren't the most grounded group of individuals. They were constantly seeing things like mermaids, serpents, and other biblical nightmares. When you consider the fact that these groups of men were also completely convinced for a very long time that they ran a real danger of sailing off the ends of the earth, it's no wonder they invented fantastical tales of murderous serpents. These guys also spent a lot of time in the baking heat, so their imaginations probably got the better of them by the time they returned to port with their larger-than-life stories. Who knows what they really saw when looking overboard, but we think it's a safe bet that the oarfish was at least one of the main inspirations for the sea serpent myths. With potential lengths of over 30 feet, all it would take would be for one group to see a larger oarfish in the water next to their ship, and the rest would just spiral from there. We've also heard plenty of stories regarding oarfish dying and then drifting ashore, which would make any overly religious and less scientifically minded community dumb-stricken and terrified. Number 2. Chupacabra. We've mentioned chupacabras before in a number of other videos, but this particular video is bound to send chills up your spine or haunt your dreams for the next little while. Unofficially identified as a type of a hairless Malaysian bear, this animal would do some serious damage if anyone ever let it out of its cage. Just look at that ferocity and those ridiculous teeth when they're bared. We couldn't help but notice, however, that it looks eerily similar to what chupacabras are expected to look like, albeit a little smaller than average. Could be that this is a juvenile or infant chupacabra, or some other close relative. If they really do exist in real life, we really don't know all that much about these elusive creatures. Furthermore, we really wouldn't be able to say for sure if it's a real-life cryptid unless we were able to conduct further tests, which is unlikely to happen at this point. Given that not much has been heard about the supposed goat sucker since this video was released at least a couple of years ago, we can probably assume that the general consensus that we're looking at a bear was confirmed, although we're keeping our fingers crossed for a government cover-up. Those are always fun to figure out. There's also the fact that the creature was discovered in Shenzhen Reservoir in Sand Bay, China, which puts it well outside the chupacabra's established territory of the Americas and well within reach of the clutches of their military. It would be really cool if this thing turned out to be an Asian relative or counterpart to the South American chupacabras or the incredibly similar wendigos found further up north. The beast was found swimming around in the reservoir and was rescued by Department of Drainage workers. The ideas that it could be a bear are based around the fact that the little guy might have alopecia or some other issue that led to all of its fur falling out. Many locals in the area have also suggested that it could be some sort of Chinese water monster of legend. Whatever this thing is, we hope it's been given its shots by now. Number 1. Pygmy Ewoks. While not technically a cryptid, this is what comes to mind in this next clip that seems to show a miniature humanoid creature briefly coming into view before retreating quickly into the brush and away from prying eyes. Could be that this thing is an imp as well. Imps are said to be mischievous cousins of nymphs and dryads, although most experts claim that they're able to tell them apart fairly easily. This little guy is obviously a little more rotund than most descriptions of imps, which makes that a less likely scenario. While biking along a dirt track, a guy's seen pulling up to one of his friends who's fallen. They quickly point out that there's something strange on the track ahead, and as the helmet cam is raised, we get a quick glimpse of a small figure that then takes off running in the opposite direction. Not about to let his quarry get away that easily, the biker then guns it and tries to give chase. It's obvious that the small creature knows the area well, and the tall grass alongside the track makes for perfect cover. After a brief search, the biker's friends finally catch up and begin to fan out on foot in an attempt to locate whatever it was they saw. Either their prey was really good at hiding or just too quick for them because it manages to effectively elude the group of searchers and they end up coming up empty-handed. The most likely explanation here is one that most people seem to be agreed upon, but is still fairly out there. It turns out that groups of pygmies live in and around the area, with many being reclusive, doing whatever they can to avoid people. Even though many of these tiny people shy away from modern civilization, they appear to make use of modern amenities such as clothing. Their miniature size would give them an absolute advantage when trying to avoid other people, making escape easy if they were, say, accidentally surprised by a group riding motorbikes. They would also very much resemble a small animal on two legs if you only caught a small glimpse and weren't immediately sure what you were looking at. We still think it'd be a lot more fun to say we ran into an Ewok, but it's not every day that modern man crosses paths with these rare pygmies, so it would still make for quite a story at the end of the day. Hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you did, make sure you click that subscribe button before you head out if you're new. That's all you have to do. Come on, just click it. I know you want to. Oh, and if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. I heard it gives you superpowers in the future or something. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Quickly and without any warning. Goalies are constantly being bumped and bruised, with many taking multiple kicks straight to the face as they attempt to make a save and gain control of the situation. Even though they're the only players to be able to use their hands, with the exception of free throws of course, you might think that they're able to keep their hands up for long enough to deflect some of the more major blows, but sometimes mistakes do happen. Petr Cech of the Czech Republic was playing in a match back in 2006 when he ran out to pick up a ball that was located a fair distance from the net and off to the side. Looking to score or at least make a centering kick, midfielder Stephen Hunt maintained his speed as he tried to catch up to the ball and keep it out of the challenging goalkeeper's hands. Petr dove for the ball, reaching it ahead of Hunt, who unfortunately wasn't able to stop himself in time and careened headlong into Petr, who was focused on the ball instead of his skull. What happened next must have hurt pretty bad. Hunt was shaken, but it turns out that his knee had connected with the side of Petr's skull, which was immediately fractured quite badly. He was immediately rushed to the hospital, where surgeons performed emergency brain surgery, only barely managing to save his life. Doctors told him afterward that 2 large pieces of his skull were actually floating loose and had been pushed into his brain, stating that he almost certainly would have died if they'd been even a sliver deeper. Despite his massive injuries, Petr was only out for 3 months before getting back to work and was starting shortly afterward. He says that his ordeal was eye-opening and that he's always made sure to wear a head guard to help prevent accidents like this from ever happening again. We think that's pretty brave of him and doubt we'd be able to get back to the game so quickly, if at all, after such a horrific injury that could have been so much worse. Petr's legacy is pretty impressive when all's said and done, with many of his Chelsea supporters still having room to cheer for him, even after his move to Arsenal, one of Chelsea FC's biggest rivals in the Premier League. Number 4. Masato Kudo. This Japanese footballer had just started up with the Vancouver Whitecaps, one of North America's Major League Soccer teams. The MLS is picking up steam, and many people who otherwise wouldn't be interested in football are slowly coming around to the sport and its finer points. Kudo only played 1 season with the Whitecaps, which ended with a less than impressive outcome. To begin with, he didn't really perform as expected, with his other issue being a violent on-field collision with Chicago Fire goalkeeper Matt Lampson. He was chasing after the ball after it was booted to the right of his opponent's goal. Lampson got to the ball first, and it looks like he tried to avoid a collision, with Kudo having too much momentum to stop himself. The two collided, with Lampson getting knocked in the side and Kudo taking a massive blow to his face, leaving him bleeding from his mouth and knocking him out instantly. Other players on both teams immediately rush over to help him, putting him in the recovery position and trying to ensure that he doesn't choke while he's out. Medics finally arrive, immediately getting down to assess the situation and give Kudo some much needed medical attention. The hit was so powerful that he actually broke his jaw and literally was swallowing his tongue. The opposing players who were first to reach him definitely helped him out then by stabilizing his neck and trying to get him on his side, as he very easily could have died with his injuries. Amazingly, Kudo wasn't on the sidelines for too long after his brush with death and was even awake and able to respond to hospital staff by the time he arrived, meaning he's got some serious pain tolerance and is able to take a huge hit only to bounce back with minimal fuss and bother. Most of us would have been goners right then and there, which speaks to Kudo's incredible strength and resilience. Number 3. Mauricio Molina. A pro who has played for numerous clubs throughout his career, Molina's life was almost ended during a match back in 2013 when FC Seoul squared up against opponents Busan Park. He was on the attack and jumped to make a header attempt after receiving a cross, but the opposing goalkeeper had other plans. In his attempt to knock the ball clear, he swung a wild fist through the air, connecting squarely with Molina's head and taking him down like a bag of bricks. Molina was knocked out on contact and, much like Kudo, ended up swallowing his tongue with the force of the hit. We already knew that goalkeepers were tough, but after a little review, it seems like they've got superhuman strength, with the ability to make foes swallow their own tongues for a complete and total takedown. Again, players from both sides came to his aid and were able to clear his airway before medics arrived to take over and take him to the hospital for further examination. He was obviously seriously concussed, but suffered no further injuries after the blow to the head, which marks him as yet another footballer who happened to have luck on his side. It's worth noting that footballers everywhere seem to be pretty skilled field medics, each of these incidents being followed by some incredible displays of skill and caring. What makes Molina's knockout hit home a little more for some is the fact that his 2 sons were also in attendance that day, looking forward to watching their dad play. They must have been terrified as they watched from the stands, not knowing exactly what was going on other than the fact that something very horrible had happened to their dad. Thankfully, Molina pulled through, thanks to the quick thinking of his fellow players and medics, with his kids not having to go through the pain of watching their dad die in front of their eyes, which would have been horrible to say the least. Molina ended up getting back to the game after some time to recover and ended up doing just as well as he previously did, despite his harrowing ordeal and subsequent setback. This is yet another example of just how tough footballers really are, with some being able to take hits that some American football players couldn't. Number 2. Shane Duffy. Shane's career is still going strong, although his prospects were seriously limited after what seemed like a routine accident on the field almost led to him bleeding out in front of everyone present without even realizing it. The incident occurred during a training match while he was preparing to represent Ireland by joining their national team. During a routine play, he ended up in a routine collision, which happens all the time in football. With players constantly vying for possession and trying to knock each other off the ball, and with so much at stake during almost every match they play, bumps and bruises are all in a day's work, with any malicious attempts to cause harm being caught and punished by the referee. Even accidental hits that cross the line end up being flagged if they're suspicious, with this one particular hit not being spectacular in the least. During training, the players involved wouldn't even really be opponents, leaving no reason to be overly rough. The hit didn't end up with any red flags raised, except when Duffy stopped to address the rest of the team and complained about a particular set of symptoms. He told those present that his stomach hurt and he couldn't figure out why. He was taken to his team surgeon, who immediately recognized that he needed very serious medical attention. He was rushed to the hospital, where it was confirmed that Duffy had ended up with a lacerated liver after the hit and was slowly bleeding out internally, which is fatal if not treated. Surgeons were able to eventually stop the bleeding and save Duffy's life. Shane has continued to play football professionally and has said that his freak injury won't discourage him in the future. He even recently represented Ireland in the EUFA Euro Cup in 2016, finally fulfilling the goal he set out 6 years earlier to fulfill. Shane is yet another footballer who overcame some serious odds after a life-threatening injury and continued to excel in his chosen sport. That kind of dedication is certainly worth looking up to, and we wish Shane all the best in his career from here on out. Number 1. Fabrice Muamba. Fabrice was playing for Bolton in the quarterfinals of the 2012 FA Cup when he suddenly dropped on the pitch mid-game. Play was stopped for over an hour while medics tried desperately to revive him. He was given CPR and assisted oxygen and had to be given 2 shocks with a defibrillator while laying motionless on the pitch. It was later determined that he suffered from a massive heart attack, and medics who were on the scene later confirmed that his heart stopped for a full 78 minutes before he was finally brought back from the brink. Muamba was also given a further 12 defibrillator shocks by EMTs while en route to the hospital after being removed from the field. He only recovered consciousness the next day after a night filled with tense anticipation. Fans were probably relieved to hear that he hadn't died right in front of them. Unlike the rest of the players on our list, probably because of the nature of his injury, he retired from football and never played another professional match again. He's currently still going strong and is a journalist, which enables him to interact with former colleagues and still immerse himself in the game from time to time. While we don't expect footballers to have their hearts give out in the middle of the game, with us seeing them as being in peak physical condition, heart attacks do occur on football pitches more than you might expect, with the majority of players who suffer from them being African. We don't know what this means just yet, but there's a growing trend that has many people worried. We're just glad that Muamba wasn't a part of those statistics, and are glad that he managed to pull through after such a close brush with death. While Muamba's wasn't due to a collision like our other list items, it's probably the most disturbing because he was the only player to actually be declared dead for a full 78 minutes. Hopefully he's taking better care of himself these days and spending more time relaxing instead of pushing his heart to the point of collapse in the pursuit of an FA Cup championship win. Hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you did, make sure you click that subscribe button before you head out if you're new. That's all you have to do. Come on, just click it. I know you want to. Oh, and if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. I heard it gives you superpowers in the future or something. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Everest has captured our imaginations for hundreds of years. Locals have long called the mountain Sagarmatha and treated it with the utmost respect. Tourists are now beginning to take over the area, however, and the problems involved are piling up. We hope to shed some light on these issues with a rundown of 5 strangest things found on Everest. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notified every day for more amazing content. With that being said, let's begin. Number 5. Bodies. Countless individuals have taken on Everest since it was first discovered, with more flocking to the mountain every year to claim their bragging rights. These people range from hardcore mountaineers to everyday tourists with a little extra cash to throw around. Experience doesn't count for all that much on Everest, with many experienced climbers succumbing to the perils involved. The first recorded deaths on Everest were those of 7 porters who lost their lives in an avalanche while working with the British Mount Everest expedition in 1922. Back in the early days, even more climbers lost their lives due to inexperience, unfamiliarity with the terrain, and lack of proper equipment or supplies. Advances in technology have removed much of the danger involved, as well as improving safety measures available. Estimates put the toll at well over 200 bodies. These include climbers, porters, and Sherpas who were tasked with helping climbers navigate the treacherous terrain, as well as carrying supplies and equipment. One such climber who met his fate in 1996 is now one of the most infamous corpses on the mountain. Also worth noting is that the climber in question, Tuesang Paljor, now nicknamed Green Boots, perished during a sudden blizzard that left him completely exposed to the elements close to the summit. A further 7 people also died during the very same blizzard, making it one of the most tragic days in Everest's relatively brief climbing history. He was wearing neon green boots when he died, hence his popular new name. For the past 20 years, he has lain on the slopes near Everest's summit and creates an active barrier to climbers when the snow cover is light. Huge numbers of climbers can recall having to step over him in order to finally reach their target, which is an incredibly grim reminder of what can go wrong. Transporting Tuesang's body down the mountain, along with the many others strewn all over the place, would be a costly and difficult proposition filled with all sorts of obstacles to overcome. This is why mountaineers of the past were content to simply leave them be. With the number of climbers left on the slopes every year, these numbers, however, are starting to reach unmanageable levels, and people are starting to realize that something will have to be done as far as cleanup's concerned. preferably sooner rather than later. Many have taken on the challenge and hope to be able to rid Everest's higher reaches of bodies. Current climbers say that the grim reminders of those who died on the slopes are a poignant reminder, with one guide saying that he's always saddened when he has to pass by the body of his friend, Scott Fisher. The real issue here is that making such a trip is a necessary inevitability, reopening those wounds each time. Most of these bodies are simply pushed into a crevasse or covered up if possible to lessen the continuing impact of their presence. Number 4. Garbage. With all those people taking on the world's greatest mountain, trash is bound to pile up a little bit. For a very long time, garbage and waste brought up by climbers really didn't make it back down, leaving it to steadily accumulate over the years. In order to help alleviate the issues that will eventually arise with so much garbage left strewn about, efforts are being taken to ensure that any visitors to the mountain do their part to aid cleanup efforts by carrying as much trash down as they possibly can. A new push has even seen the government of Nepal organizing the supply of canvas bags for the use of trash bags. Since no trace camping methods are able to stop the future buildup of garbage but don't do much to help remove what's already there, these enormous bags, capable of holding up to 176 pounds of trash, are expected to be carried back down by helicopter. This move was triggered after deadly avalanches led to the climbing season being halted repeatedly since 2014. One of these avalanches basically wiped out Everest's southern base camp and killed 19 people in the process. While the loss of human life is absolutely tragic, the further issue of how to dispose of their tents and supplies, as well as those left by rescuers, is still ongoing. The use of helicopters to bring these canvas garbage bags down from the mountainside was favored over the use of human labor, which would have put many more people at risk. The choppers themselves have been a regular sight at Everest's base camp, as they're used to transport large amounts of essential equipment up the mountain. Until now, however, they've made almost all of their return trips empty-handed. This method of using aerial craft that are already regular visitors will have the added bonus of having less of a deleterious effect on the environment in the area. The overall goal is to reduce crowding, boost safety measures, and help maintain Everest's natural beauty. Additionally, it'll also potentially allow more of those bodies mentioned earlier to be cleaned up and disposed of properly. It's about time the 7,000 to 100,000 visitors that Everest sees each year started to take their mess seriously. It seems like these conservation and cleanup efforts have been met with positive reviews, and a majority of regular climbers are on board, which will make things much easier to maintain. This, in turn, will help produce a more meaningful change in the coming years. Number 3. Human waste. It's not just garbage that gets left behind on Mount Everest. Human waste is seemingly piling up in alarming amounts on the mountain these days, with very little idea of how to properly dispose of it. As we mentioned, Everest can see upwards of 100,000 visitors during a busy season, and in the past, most of what was brought up there was left there. That way of thinking ended up being twofold for any waste produced on the mountain. It should also go without saying that there would probably be very few volunteers willing to strap a sack of human waste on their backs and start making their way down to the closest sanitation center. This has led to a problem that has no easy solution, but can have devastating impacts on human health and the environment if left unchecked. It's estimated that the mountain's numerous visitors, many of whom are only weekend warriors with no real concept of these extreme conditions and the problems posed, can generate upwards of 12,000 pounds of bodily waste every year. The issue is now becoming well known, with numerous cases reported of people becoming seriously ill after drinking contaminated water. Even before you get to base camp, many locals who offer rooms to tourists in the lower altitude towns and villages don't have proper waste disposal systems, with many of them ill-equipped to handle such a large amount of people constantly passing through. Landfills and dumps are becoming more commonplace on the mountain, destroying the natural environment at an alarming scale. The disposal of human waste in large open-air pits is evident everywhere on your way up to base camp, and if something isn't done soon, the problem will just increase exponentially, as has been seen in recent years. Some companies have moved in and hope to supply Everest with equipment to convert human waste into methane with very little byproducts left over. The group, called the Mount Everest Biogas Project, has run into problems running their equipment at such extremes of cold and altitude, but they're currently working on a solution they think will solve the problem once and for all. We hope they're able to keep up with those 12,000 pounds, because if something isn't done soon, Everest will will quickly become too filthy to make any future excursions worthwhile. Number 2. Wildlife. When one pictures Everest, wildlife doesn't usually feature. The extreme conditions aren't very conducive to life, with the weather being extremely unpredictable from one moment to the next. We're beginning to learn more and more, however, that these extremes can't ever prevent life from taking hold, no matter how detrimental they are. Even at 29,029 feet above sea level, however, wildlife can be found in surprisingly good health. The mountain is home to Himalayan jumping spiders in large numbers. These spiders can survive even the highest reaches of Everest year-round and are, apart from a few species of bird, pretty much the only creatures to do so. Interestingly, a British expedition to the mountain in 1924 also brought back previously unknown grasshopper specimens that seem to only live on and around the world's tallest mountain. In addition to these critters, larger predators have been spotted on Everest's slopes, with the incredibly rare snow leopard being an exceptional example. They're known to be reclusive and solitary, feeding on ibex and sheep that can be found around the lower slopes. Another staple is the Himalayan tahr, which is a horned mammal similar to goats. Their hooves are specially adapted for steep, rocky cliffs, making them well suited to the area. Himalayan black bears can also be found in the forests around the base of the mountain, which is another habitat of the tahr during the colder, more unpredictable months. These animals are all perfectly adapted to Everest's rough environment and are even better suited to deal with the climate, which can be unforgiving at the best of times. One animal that calls the mountain slopes home that we didn't expect to reside around Everest is the massively rare red panda, which is a type of bear cat similar to a binturong. They don't make their way up to the higher reaches, preferring to remain in the bamboo-rich Sagarmatha Natural Park at lower elevations. These pandas are extremely vulnerable to extinction in the near future, with only around 10,000 of them thought to still be alive in the world. Number 1. Marine fossils. A glimpse into Everest's humble past has recently captured the attention of researchers and scientists across the globe. Evidence of marine fossils has led to people literally digging into the past to learn more about how they managed to reach the uppermost levels of the world's tallest mountain. Many numerous expeditions are currently being planned, with many more having found undeniable evidence of marine fossils embedded in rock found in Everest's uppermost reaches. Because of the danger involved and the fact that many of the areas they expect to find further specimens are located well above the notorious death zone of 25,000 feet, collecting enough samples to get a solid idea of Everest's history with the world's oceans will be a tough proposition. It's been proven without a doubt that the top of Everest is made up of marine-based limestone. Likewise, marine fossils have been detected in samples removed by interested climbers. If we're able to get a proper sense of the timeline and geological processes involved in Everest's formative years, we can accurately track its ascent based on what we currently know from other sites that are much less onerous to study. This could give us incredible insights into the mountain's epic history, as well as help us understand the ancient world a little better. With so much study being done around the world, it could very well be that Everest's relatively untouched summit could yield some surprising new data and potentially even unearth previously unknown species or geologic processes. Hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you did, make sure you click that subscribe button before you head out if you're new. That's all you have to do. Come on, just click it. I know you want to. Oh, and if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. I heard it gives you superpowers in the future or something. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Nothing lasts forever, but the following 5 places that'll disappear in your lifetime are all potentially preventable losses. That being said, both global warming and man-made perils are popping up, threatening to derail even our best conservation efforts. We plan to show you just how bad things can get if something isn't done soon to rectify the situation. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notified every day for more amazing content. With that being said, let's begin. Number 5. Maldives. The Maldives are one of the most threatened places on Earth with regard to rising sea levels, and are attracting experts from all over the world to see how they're currently combating the disturbing trend we're currently witnessing when it comes to climate change. The entire country is incredibly aware of the problems that they'll be facing in the near future, and are doing everything they can to avoid disaster. The country's coral reefs are already rapidly bleaching, which could lead to even more issues in the long run. Back in 2008, Mohammed Nasheed, the president at the time, was even seriously considering purchasing land elsewhere in order to relocate citizens, just in case. That plan has since been put on the back burner, with the current government opting to rent out islands in the Maldives, using the money to take on massive land reclamation projects, with new islands scheduled to be constructed in the future. A number of islands are already being built right now. 8 islands are in the process of being created. One, called Hulhumali, is the site of the in-development City of Hope, the first of the Maldive man-made island cities. It's scheduled to be completed in 2023 and is able to house 130,000 people. The island of Hulhumali features walls that are 3 meters tall, which is half a meter higher than the country's highest natural land. This would allow citizens in areas prone to flooding to move to these new islands that sit well above sea level. Another approach is being touted by Shahina Ali, who believes that the government should be wary about destroying the ocean's habitats surrounding these new islands, especially since their coral reefs are already very threatened. Ali believes that the development of these new islands could cause even more harm by leaving the natural islands more exposed to erosion and flooding. He's also concerned that a massive amount of garbage has been washing up on the new man-made islands, causing even more damage to the surrounding environment. The Maldives are more optimistic today than they were a few years ago, but the threat of flooding is still very real, and only time will tell if the government is able to effect any real change. The bleaching and receding of the nation's coral reefs, along with all the trash collecting on the new islands, could very easily hurt tourism, making it harder to raise enough capital to properly construct their new islands before it's too late. Number 4. Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands is another country that'll suffer the consequences of climate change more so than most. Like the Maldives, they're making great strides toward effectively dealing with the challenges they face and are confident that they will be able to persevere. Not everyone is so optimistic. With most of the country barely sitting above sea level, it's looking more and more likely that they're about to deal with some very serious issues head-on. Hurricane Ivan, for example, which hit the island as a Category 5 storm, ended up causing widespread flooding throughout a large part of the country, with many locals island-wide being stuck stranded in emergency situations with very few options available. Over 70% of the country was overwhelmed by the storm surge, which is no laughing matter. With global warming making the Atlantic a hot spot for massive and unpredictable storms these days, erosion is a real issue. Furthermore, the loss of the country's mangrove forests, which help to prevent natural erosion, simply compounds the problem. The coral reefs around the Cayman Islands are also slowly dying off, leaving the coastline even more exposed. The Cayman Islands' average height above sea level is 7 meters, which puts them in a better spot than the Maldives to be sure, but that average doesn't account for the overwhelmingly low-lying areas, especially along the coastlines. This could seriously hurt their economy. The Caymans are a banking hub in the Caribbean, but they also rely on tourism in a big way. With most condos and hotels located in these threatened areas, the island could see a very serious drop in tourism. Even more alarming, the country's only electrical company and airport are also located on the coast, meaning that a costly move might be necessary if they wish to protect these vital locations. So far, the government seems to be unaware of the dangers posed, with very little focus being put on ensuring that these issues don't occur in the future. If they drag their feet too long, many experts believe that they could actually speed up the country's decline, making things worse for everyone involved. Some groups, however, are pushing for the nation to build sea defenses, with the Netherlands' Thames Barrier being cited as a prime example of how well this approach could work. If preventative measures are put in place anytime soon, they could very well save the Caymans and ensure their survival in the future. The way things are looking, it could be too late by the time the government realizes the very serious situation they're in and takes steps to ensure that flooding is mitigated in the years to come. Number 3. Great Barrier Reef. In the past couple of decades, the Great Barrier Reef has lost around half of its mass, with the northern part of the reef losing 2/3 of its corals, with rising ocean temperatures wreaking mayhem on the coral that makes up the entirety of the vast underwater environment. This could have immense repercussions, with effects being seen all over the world if nothing is done to protect the Great Barrier Reef, which is an extremely important aspect of all ocean life on our planet. Humans have played a huge part in this, even when you discount the effects of global warming. Pesticides from farms located along Australia's east coast, as well as the countless tour boats that dot the reef on a daily basis, are causing irreparable damage, with many concerned that the effects are too far along to be effectively reversed. Still, global warming is the biggest culprit of them all. Corals need algae to survive, but many types of algae, especially those that the corals need, can't deal with warmer water. Without that algae to sustain the corals, the reef is doomed. Some efforts are being undertaken to help reclaim lost sections of the reef, with a number of scientific advancements being utilized in the process. Even NASA has pitched in, allowing researchers to properly map the world's reefs. Advanced cameras mounted on a Gulfstream 4 jet take numerous pictures while flying above the reefs. Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences researcher Eric Hochberg has dubbed the approach the Coral Reef Airborne Laboratory. Another company that's pitching in to do their part is Google, who are applying their Street View tech to map reefs and identify which ones are still salvageable worldwide. These efforts are important because if coral reefs disappear, mankind itself will suffer from incredibly deleterious effects that will be seen all throughout the food chain from the bottom on up. If sea temperatures continue to rise, corals will actively lose their remaining stress tolerances. They really are very fragile and need a very specific environment to thrive. While some are doing everything they can to help save the Great Barrier Reef, the recent plan to ship massive amounts of coal from Queensland to India will end up with a huge amount of traffic passing directly over most of the Great Barrier Reef. Moves like this one, coupled with the issues raised by rising ocean temperatures, are only making things worse and are actively hurting conservation efforts. Number 2. Venice. This may come as a surprise to some, but it was bound to happen eventually. It seems that Venice is facing some vicious and widespread flooding on a fairly regular basis, as changes in climate and sea levels threaten to cause the city to become completely uninhabitable over the course of the next century. Sea level rise in the Mediterranean is expected to be much more than larger bodies of water, with most estimates hovering around sea levels rising by up to 5 feet by 2100, much more than the 1 meter global trend. The Mediterranean is already causing widespread issues in the city, with residents unable to properly combat the floodwaters. After studying the problem intently, a team of researchers recently identified 33 locations in Venice that they believe are almost certainly going to completely disappear eventually. The city has already been looking into ways to combat this, with their Moe's Flood Barrier project being one way that they hope to control rising waters. A system of gates and inlets will allow for water levels to be monitored and controlled to a certain extent, providing some good news in a sea of bad. Flooding is currently so rampant in Venice that locals barely blink, just accepting it as an inevitability and trying their best to maintain business as usual. Even high tides can mean flooding of up to 194 centimeters. This occurs year-round, but it's more prevalent during the winter months. These waters do recede after a couple of hours, but rising sea levels will make this issue even more of a threat going forward, making things worse. NASA's been putting up with a lot of criticism from all over the place, with some claiming that they've already found alien life on Mars, and others saying that they need to produce more evidence if they're to be taken seriously. Whatever side of the argument you're on, these 5 alien species caught by NASA on Mars are our way of addressing the issue and helping to keep the debate rational. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notified every day for more amazing content. With that being said, let's begin. Number 5. Anonymous. Anonymous recently claimed that NASA was incredibly close to finding alien life on other planets, sparking quite a lot of controversy. The notorious hacker activist group didn't have much to back up their theory, however. They quite simply stated the obvious, which is that we're now able to chart distant galaxies with more precision than ever before, and it's only a matter of time before we eventually bump into an alien species. That's not the hard evidence that all the fanfare seemed to suggest, but it does make sense. We just think that whoever's in charge of Anonymous needs to step their game up in a big way. Sure, NASA's on the verge of being able to make contact and communicate with alien species, so to speak. This doesn't really sum up the entire issue behind the if and when of such discoveries being made, if they're ever made at all in our lifetime. The odds are stacked against us, at least in the next little while, with Anonymous's claims being a little misguided and their announcement just a little too early to make any real headlines. People are still buying into all of their nonsense, however, and we thought we'd take some time to set the record straight. We get what they're trying to do, but trying to make themselves a part of something much larger than themselves comes across as petty. Anonymous is really grasping at straws these days, and we can't believe that they've sunk so low. They were never to be taken seriously to begin with, and this just proves as much. The great hacker collective picking on NASA is just a ploy to increase the belief in bogus conspiracy theories around the world, and we're not buying it. Furthermore, we can't really get behind it, especially when they're going out of their way to spread disbelief. NASA is making real strides when it comes to space research, and we can really expect good things to come soon. We also think that they'd tell us the second they did. NASA's really given us no reason not to trust them, and we can't wait until they finally do find life on other planets. Hopefully this happens in our lifetimes, but we're not holding our breath just yet. A planet having life on it doesn't necessarily mean that said life will be intelligent. The red planet may not have Martians running around on its surface, but there's still a chance, however small, that microbial life is still clinging to some rock in some cave somewhere on Mars, and that's pretty cool to consider. Number 4. Skull. Speaking of theories, one image is circulating around the internet with plenty of people hopping on board and saying that it could be proof of alien life on Mars. Not just that, they say that the scene portrays evidence of an ancient battle complete with shields and warriors. At least, that's what they'd think of when they see a blurry image of what NASA says are just rocks and nothing more than that. We assume it's kinda like looking at clouds, hoping to see something familiar in them. When it's just clouds, you can be sure what you're seeing isn't real, but it seems that plenty of people have managed to convince themselves that random rock formations and features must be signs of something strange. You really have to be trying extra hard to see some of the structures and buildings that some people see, but we have to admit that this formation does look pretty cool. Despite the fact that it's blurry and out of focus, zoomed in and altered beyond recognition, this photo does kind of look like a skull. We're not so sure about the shield that people see, but that being said, we don't think that this is evidence of any aliens that were caught on NASA's cameras. It's fun to imagine these things and even look for evidence yourself, but posting outlandish claims of irrefutable proof all over the place and sucking people into the hype unnecessarily is just ridiculous. When all's said and done, NASA did find something interesting, but that something is probably nothing more than a rock formation. What is interesting to think about is that the microbial life that we mentioned in our first point could be lying not too far below that skull. There are so many more realistic theories that could help point us in the right direction and add to the conversation in a meaningful way, other than just posting blurry photos. We get that proof of that caliber is tough to come by, but we should then wait it out and leave the big statements to the people who know better. Don't get us wrong, we're still gonna report on all the news of strange events and creepy sightings, but we're also quite happy accepting the facts as they are. Speculation is one thing, but presenting it as fact just isn't our style. If you do think there's some merit to this story, don't be shy, let us know what you think in the comments below. We're always happy to promote engaging discussions that help us all work our heads around these tough concepts. Number 3. Rover Discovery. And so we move into our next item, which one uploader has claimed is proof that there are actual structures on Mars. Not only that, but they also seem to be claiming that these structures look very much like those found on Earth, with one shown in the image resembling a barn. Taken by the Curiosity rover, the image was scrutinized by experts and amateurs alike, with more than a few of the latter claiming that something must be there that hasn't been formed naturally. The photo shows what looks like a structure in a huge panoramic shot encompassing a pretty large area. The image is then enhanced with a tiny spot zoomed in on, showing what the uploader says is a teeny tiny alien, only 6 inches tall, peering out from behind a rock. The idea that a 6-inch alien was seen after enlarging such an indistinct photo is laughable at best, and this image has to be a fake. Even if one tiny frame showed what looked like an alien, we're gonna have to see more than one tiny little critter in that entire shot. If there's one, then there should be more. The idea that there are so many different forms of life on Mars, at least according to the overwhelming amount of media being presented as evidence, on the same planet would mean that it's teeming with life. If that were the case, NASA wouldn't be able to hide it from everyone. That would be a huge conspiracy, which would, in this day and age, fall apart pretty quickly. The entire agency can't be hiding information like this, which is important because the entire agency staff would know almost immediately if someone found it. The scientific community is pretty open, and they love to share their data for peer review and evaluation. It's what scientific progress is all about, and it helps push us forward as a whole. We get that spreading alien propaganda is fun, but taking the time to scour these images for something blurry and misshapen, or going ahead and doctoring a photo, then making up a story surrounding it, just doesn't seem like it's worth the time if we're being completely honest. Sure, there are probably some strange things going on in the world, but Hollywood has us expecting the wrong kinds of alien life. We should instead be focusing on the things that we can't see, digging into the planet itself and collecting core samples as well as dust and dirt. That is where we're really gonna find alien life, and the idea that it'll walk up to a NASA rover to take a selfie just isn't all that realistic. Number 2. City roof. It seems like it's not just buildings and structures that we need to keep an eye out for on Mars, but also entire cities. We wondered how a complete city could have been hidden from us for so long, especially with all the recent interest in Mars, and the answer is conveniently simple. The Martians have been building their communities underground, which helps keep them out of sight and out of mind. The experts say that the formations are nothing more than eroded sand dunes that were photographed by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, but that hasn't stopped scores of conspiracy theorists from offering up their own opinions, with many of those bashing NASA for withholding evidence and sweeping the truth under the rug. The area that houses this supposed city isn't all that large, however, meaning that this theory is perfectly in line with the idea that Mars is populated with tiny beings, which helps to explain why we wouldn't have seen them before. Look, this is all getting a little out of hand. The evidence supporting this underground city seems to be that some of the sand dunes seem to be covered in shadow, making it look like they have no base. This, in turn, makes them look a little like ventilation slats that open up and provide fresh air to the city occupants below. Some theorists have also claimed that these could be for temperature control. The person who uploaded this photo and made the initial claim has also said in the past that pictures previously taken of the surface of the red planet featured squirrels and monkeys. This is proof that these theorists are a little out to lunch and not ready to consider all the facts. We also don't believe that aliens would be so humanoid, going as far as to adopt human infrastructure and ventilation practices, which is unlikely. It's also even more unlikely that they passed these same practices down to our ancestors back in the day, but some people do like to dream big. Number 1. Water. The best evidence to suggest that Mars is able to sustain life is the fact that we now know for sure that the red planet holds water on its surface, which is one of the essential building blocks for life as we know it. The search for water on Mars has been a long one that many opponents to the theory said was a waste of our time. NASA managed to find plenty of evidence that suggested that Mars once held water, but in 2015, they found even more proof that water is present, albeit in small quantities, on the planet's surface. This evidence does need to be investigated, and that's what scientists do when confronted with new data, instead of simply making wild stabs in the dark when confronted with things they don't understand. This probably won't lead to much, and we're not even 100% sure that what they've discovered is actually water after all, but it will be another step forward in the search for extraterrestrial life. If we stay on the course and maintain a scientific approach to the way we deal with these kinds of discoveries, then it's really only a matter of time before we find incontrovertible proof of alien life among the stars. Unfortunately, that could end up being a long time coming, but we're happy to wait it out and let the pros do their thing for now. Hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you did, make sure you click that subscribe button before you head out if you're new. That's all you have to do. Come on, just click it. I know you want to. Oh, and if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. I heard it gives you superpowers in the future or something. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Centaurs are a beast that feature in legends all across the world, dating back centuries. Half man, half horse, these creatures tend to dwell in forests and are supposed to be a proud and noble race. These 5 centaurs caught on camera and spotted in real life aren't the best evidence, but we thought you'd get a kick out of them anyway. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notified every day for more amazing content. With that being said, let's begin. Number 5. The Centaur Rebellion. This is one centaur who knows how to take care of himself, getting a little shoe polish applied during his hectic day, pausing for a few minutes before resuming his galloping all over the city. This is also what we expect the centaur uprising to look like. Humans really don't stand a chance, so living means adapting. That kind of adaptation may be rough to begin with, but it sure beats a centaur's arrow in the chest, which we would suspect the alternative to be. This centaur picture is obviously photoshopped, along with all the others in our countdown because, let's face it, centaurs just don't exist. We couldn't get a real picture of one if we browsed through all the ancient tomes that civilization has ever created. People really dig their stories, but half-horse, half-man monstrosities aren't hiding in any nook or cranny we could possibly find. We'll admit that they could have pulled off a miracle, learning to breathe underwater and setting up under the waves at the bottom of the ocean. It could even be that Atlantis isn't populated by people, but is a forgotten city filled with centaurs content to remain hidden for now. That being said, this particular specimen does seem quite into his hoof, making him more like a centaur dandy than what we can expect from the rest of the species. It's good to see him keeping up proper hoof care, but we think that his attention to his feet are overshadowed by that terrible tribal tattoo and space monkey buzz cut. For anyone who didn't get that reference, do yourselves a favor and watch Fight Club. We hear it's fallen out of style lately and wouldn't mind revitalizing a classic. Anyway, getting back on topic. That farmer's tan is pretty impressive in its own right, just adding to the juxtaposition between his human and horse parts. He's really at odds with himself, it seems, and we really hope this centaur can learn to love his human side the way he does his horsiness. With a little care from his groomsmen, he could be quite striking, but his servant's appearance doesn't really inspire confidence itself. He'd probably be better off on his own, but these two could just have one of those bonds that can only be understood by a centaur and its human. It's really touching when you stop to think about it, forgetting the whole, overthrowing the human race and forcing us into servitude thing. That's gonna take us a little while to get past, with no forgiving or forgetting happening in the near future. With Atlantis open for bidders, we could just make our way down there and call squatters' rights. That'll show those damn dirty centaurs who's boss. Number 4. Irish Centaur. Okay, so we took a little jab at the expense of the Irish here, but they're able to take a joke, generally being the first to point out their stereotypes regarding pasty complexions and susceptibility to sunburns. This centaur looks like one who, unlike our previous example, seems to have gotten the hang of the whole human grooming thing, being able to pull off a solid outline at the very least. He looks quite proud of his accomplishments, standing out in the sun to celebrate and show himself off. His legs are magnificently adorned with shin plates, and his coat is a pretty spectacular color, buffed to a high sheen. He really looks like he'd make one hell of a show pony, except for the glaringly obvious fact that he's basically white as a ghost from the waist up. His pale skin is so apparent that he's practically see-through, and we're surprised this guy was able to stand in the sun long enough to take a picture without turning a bright lobster red. He's gotta have some extra strength sunscreen on. If not, we suspect he probably had to power through multiple family-sized bottles of 100 SPF just for his first coat. His bottom half really needs no work, but his top parts need a vacation badly. We also can't imagine why a centaur would spend their time hanging out in a pasture when he could easily do whatever the hell he wanted. Perhaps he likes it there, or maybe he just enjoys being as far away as he can from water of any kind after his miserable existence in Atlantis for all those years. We don't know how long centaurs live, but we're willing to hazard a guess that it's much longer than humans, meaning they could be ancient enough to need a lot of time to stretch their legs. If he wants to run around on dry land for a bit, a pasture isn't all that great, but it certainly fits the bill and is as suitable a place as any. Hey, you never know. Some time out in the sun and doing whatever he's currently doing at his new farm home will probably give him the tan he needs to help match his opposing parts, becoming the centaur that we all know he's capable of being. We believe in him, and will even donate an egg timer to help him keep both sides even for the best tan he's ever had in his life. Number 3. Putin is a centaur in disguise. We can't believe we didn't think of something like this sooner, and it's just perfect. Putin considers himself to be a pretty desirable guy and seems to love posing on horseback, leading to all sorts of wonderful memes, almost all of which are banned in Russia, which should come as no surprise to most of you. The somewhat tyrannical ruler of Russia, Putin's looks definitely don't match up with his own body image, and we get that he's trying to look tough, but his claims of being a sex symbol are a long ways off with man boobs like those. His centaur replica is just what we'd expect from such a project, with the rose itself being pretty graceful, and the man himself sitting upright and looking for all intents and purposes like a guy who's in control, despite the man boobs, of course. We always knew something was off about Putin, and now we can put our fingers on it. He's gotta be a centaur sent to destabilize humanity in preparation for the eventual centaur sneak attack. That's really the only explanation here, with quite real proof right here to back it up. We don't know how he manages to hide his massive lower body from us when he's in his human disguise, but we're sure a guy with his kind of resources could pull it off. Although, we bet it hurts if he has to resort to a girdle to hold everything in. Putin being a centaur would explain a lot about his hatred of just about everyone else in the world, or at least his air of superiority, and also ties in with his tendency to be a bit of a dick when it comes to international politics. His government is pretty brutal when it comes to suppressing their human population, making it a perfect testbed, filled with loyal subjects willing to do their overlord's bidding when the time is right. It goes without saying that it fits the bill and could be plausible if it wasn't so ridiculously outlandish. Then again, it would probably register on the tame side of stupid hoaxes, with much of what we come across on a regular basis being laughable at best. Number 2. The Champion. Now, this dude means business, and he's ready to get right down to it. The most noble of our centaurs, he's got matching horse and people parts, although his horse is pretty strange looking in the haunches. We don't know if it's an editing error or if this horse was seriously malnourished, but it looks pretty skeletal. It could just be an awkward angle showing a lean horse body that's just got some awkward muscles bulging all over the place. Whoever put this together set the scene in Greece, with an inspiring background of the variety you see on Bible verse booklet handouts on the street. The shot wouldn't be complete without his massive chain wrapped firmly around his hands and looking like he's casually spinning it around the camera. We don't know who got this shot, but its tackiness makes it even more impressive, with this guy definitely being a centaur general who just defeated Greece for the centaur armies. They really do like to strike a pose whenever they get a chance, absolutely loving the camera and maintaining the air of attention whores instead of a dominating war machine. We guess their horse bodies just give them an unfair advantage, with centaurs really being sweethearts who can't stop thinking about their appearance. But seriously, who are these people who are busy photoshopping random people's bodies on those of horses and posting them online? We expected to find a few of these, but they're everywhere, with most having no real explanation. The hype around aliens and many other supernatural creatures is very real these days, mostly because there's enough evidence to suggest that these sightings could possibly be real. While centaurs have just as big a following as many other creatures, the supposed evidence is very difficult to find. We expect it's because faking a centaur sighting is much more difficult than most other creatures involved, and if that's the case, then we should give kudos to these budding Photoshop artists just for trying, in the hopes that one day they'll get better and give us a fake photo that really makes us think. For now, we're content musing about their wannabe photogenic demeanors and plans for world domination. Number 1. Centaur Rockstar. And now we bring you what might be our best photoshopped centaur photo so far, as well as our first female specimen. The image is pretty busy, with her horse self obviously in the middle of taking a turn at a full gallop, digging into the sand to get a solid purchase as it makes the high-speed maneuver. The centaur's top half, however, seems blissfully unaware that she's supposed to be running at top speed and should probably pay attention to where she's going. This Ashley centaur is instead staring at an apple, loving it strongly with her eyes before taking that first bite. She's also got some pretty spectacular bangles and other homemade jewelry, making it look like she's trying to bring back the 80s in no small way. Her hair is hanging perfectly in order to simulate the wind in her hair as she's tearing through the sand, and we can only assume that she's on a beach having the time of her life. She's prepared for quite the day, even bringing a snack along to keep up her energy. We can't tell if this is training or a laid-back day of chilling out and having some fun, but we do think it's probably the best in our countdown, making it one of the only centaur photos out there that looks somewhat realistic. Still, we couldn't help but notice that her dress seems to be fused to her horse body, and we can't imagine that that's comfortable at all, with the unfortunate accident probably being pretty painful every time she moves. It is a good look, which seems to be all any centaur really needs. Hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you did, make sure you click that subscribe button before you head out if you're new. That's all you have to do. Come on, just click it. I know you want to. Oh, and if you enjoyed the video, drop a like. I heard it gives you superpowers in the future or something. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Night Stalker is the name given to all sorts of troublemakers and evildoers who strike at night, with the term most often being used to describe sexual predators. Be warned, therefore, that the following footage may be disturbing to some viewers, as we hope to inform you about 5 Night Stalkers caught on camera and spotted in real life. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notified every day for more amazing content. With that being said, let's begin. Number 5. Brisbane Peeping Tom. This video was taken down under in Queensland, Australia, and shows a very creepy person walking around a residential home, staring in windows and generally being seriously suspicious. Police released footage of the events after they realized the stalker had come back to the same spot numerous times to continue his night watch. The first time he showed up, he's seen casually walking up and looking in a window before eventually retreating back to the driveway. He stops there and